Geek. Talking baseball every week. Cause they're Gleeman and the Geek.
And welcome to Gleeman and the Geek, the Just Keep Hitting edition. I'm John Bonus, Twins Daily with me, and Gleeman at the Athletic. They ended up facing a couple of teams who have some pretty good pitching, Aaron Gleeman, and the offense kept
the whole two flaws in the what was surely thought to be a flawless argument of the games against the White Sox don't count, which we heard a lot of. One, the White Sox now, I believe, have won 6 out of 8 when not facing the Twins, including last night they beat the Guardians.
Right, yeah, right.
The Guardians would prefer it if the games against the White Sox didn't count, it turns out. And then the other flaw in that argument, I don't know, it was really an argument, meant to kind of crap on what the Twins are doing, I suppose, but is that, they faced a Boston team and a Seattle team that I believe started their respective series ranked number 1 and number 2 in the American League in team ERA.
Really? Okay.
And they won 5-2 against them.
Right.
Won 5 out of 7 against them. And it was offensive explosions. But for the most part, they were doing what they've been doing, which is hitting the ball pretty well against some very good starting pitchers.
Right.
You saw them in back-to-back days beat George Kirby and Logan Gilbert, who I would say are probably 2 of the dozen
and
or so.
Jump on them early.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Best starters in the league, certainly.
Right.
Young starters for sure. I mean, I think, and they didn't get to Luis Castillo early, but they still won that game in the opener of the 4-game series. I mean, that trio of Castillo, Kirby, and Gilbert, in my opinion, is probably the best trio in the American League, maybe in baseball. I mean, I just think Seattle's starting staff, they're down one of them. We saw Hancock sub in game 2, but he's not bad either. I mean, he'd be in a lot of rotations too. They took 3 out of 4 from a Seattle team that I think is probably certainly going to be a season-long playoff contender.
Sure.
And I think if that lineup wakes up at all, because you look up and down the lineup, and this includes old friends Jorge Polanco and Mitch Garver, who are hitting like 150 and 190. Right. But even like Julio Rodriguez. And I mean, they have some really good hitters in that lineup that just aren't hitting at all, which seems familiar to what we used to talk about the Twins a month ago. But, I think this Seattle team is legit. Obviously, they've been not great, but pretty good for a while now.
I think they entered that series in first place in the AL West, right?
Yeah.
They aren't anymore.
No, and before that, they take 2 out of 3 from the Red Sox. They lose the 3rd game to snap the winning streak at 12, which is the 2nd longest in team history. But, for the people who, and I get this totally. I mean, we talked about this, but the idea of, you won 10 in a row, you won 11 in a row, 12 in a row, but the vast majority, they won 7-0 against the White Sox. They swept the series from the Angels, who are pretty terrible. Let's see them do it against good teams. Mm-hmm. Well, now they're doing it against good teams. Yeah. I mean, they're not going 7-0.
They're about to go up in class yet again because, Toronto isn't that big of a deal, but the Yankees also come to town next week, and then right after that, we got the Guardians on the road.
This is one of the tougher portions that are like midway through it now, or 30% through it, let's say, of the schedule. I mean, Boston, Seattle, you go to Toronto. Now, the Blue Jays haven't been playing that well, but, I mean, we know. First of all, Toronto is always pretty tough to go to. And we saw last year the Blue Jays were a playoff team. They're off to a slow start, but I think generally going to be an 85, 90-something win team. Then the Yankees come to town, which will always be an issue, obviously. And then you got your big matchup against Cleveland, which could be potentially for first place. We'll see. It would be if it started right now. It would be for first place. And so, they're not free and clear yet. I mean, they're not. You got to keep playing well. If you don't play well, this next 3 series here are going to bring you back down to earth pretty quickly. Right. But especially
considering Cleveland is still ahead of you in the standings.
Yeah,
you don't want to slip too much.
Just barely 1.5 games now. It was 8.5.
Right.
2.5 weeks ago.
Right.
And Cleveland is still winning a lot more than I expected, but they've basically been now 500 for like 2.5, 3 weeks, which is kind of what everyone anticipated. They're playing the White Sox now for 3 more, but we'll see. So, I think, look, it's still very early, but, the questions that people had, or I guess not even the questions, but like the skepticism that people had with the Twins when this successful streak started and was in the middle and even towards the end, some people looked at it and said, wins are wins. That's how I kind of chose to look at it. Right. And beyond that, it was like, well, they needed to dig out of this hole. And so however that's possible, whatever, whatever ladder was lowered into that hole. You take it.
And to be fair, they couldn't have dug out any faster than they did.
Well, that was the other part that always seemed silly to me is like, you're only beating up on the bad teams. Well, yeah, they went 10-0 against them. Like, well, it wasn't like they went 6-4.
Right.
Then you might go, oh, they got some wins, but the bad teams.
Right.
And so now, look, I'm not saying these are going to be, ALCS matchups necessarily.
Right.
But Boston's pretty good and Seattle's pretty good, and the Twins certainly look like the better team in both series, I would say, regardless of what the record was. So they've won now 15. We're recording this, what's the day, Friday morning? Yeah. They've won 15 out of 17.
Yep.
They're now 2 games ahead of last year, 2 wins ahead of last year at this exact point, 37 games into last year. They're 2 wins ahead, and their pace just overall now, despite the 7-13 start, is a 96 win pace. And here's what I'll say about that. I mean, it's very early. 96 wins will win this division. I mean, we probably will talk in a minute, and we've talked before. We talked to Rocco Baldelli about this yesterday. Got some thoughts from him about just how thoroughly and quickly the AL Central has changed.
Right.
It went from last year, I believe there was a legitimate argument to be made that last year's AL Central was the worst division ever, or in this era. It certainly was one of the 5 or 10 worst divisions ever, just top to bottom. Now, the White Sox are horrible, but you've got 4 winning teams. The top 4 teams in the division have a solidly winning record against other divisions outside of just beating up on the White Sox, even if you remove those. And what we just said, the Twins are on pace for 96 wins. They're in second place. The Royals have not given up yet. So I think
that's the one that still surprises me a little bit.
Yeah, me too.
I mean, Cleveland's surprising me too, but
the Royals pitching has been just unbelievable. So I'm skeptical, but I've been wrong so far. So whatever that's worth. The Twins have also now scored 5 or more runs, which I kind of view as the magic point when the league average is roughly 4. Right. If you're scoring 5 or more, you're usually winning those games, or you should be winning those games. The Twins have scored 5 or more runs in 13 of the last 17. They did it only 3 times in the first 20.
Right,
I mean, that's the biggest turnaround. The pitching has been better, certainly. Or I would say it hasn't been great, but it's been good. And the starting pitching especially has been much more consistent because you're not getting the Varland spot where he really struggled every 5th turn.
And Paddock.
And even Paddock, too. Right. We can talk more about him in a second. But you're scoring 5+ runs in 13 out of 17 games. You're going to put together some good stretches,
right?
Because that's just a lot of offense. Particularly when a few of those recently have come against, like we said, very, very high end pitching staffs with not only elite talent but off to pretty good starts here. I mean, you look at prior to facing the Twins, go look at George Kirby's numbers, Logan Gilbert's numbers. Right. Look at their career numbers. I mean, they're just really good. But they were both off to excellent starts this year. It wasn't like they caught them while they were struggling. So, I don't know. I've been impressed with that. And, they're still doing it without Royce Lewis. They're doing it without Buxton. They're doing it without some guys who still, some of the veterans who have struggled all season haven't really snapped out of it in a huge way, although they did get some contributions finally from Manny Margot. Yeah. Which helped them.
Yeah, that's right.
But, the Vasquez and Farmer and those sort of guys are not really...
Well, and we haven't gotten a lot from the corner positions. I mean, Kirillov's had the hot start, but he's been absolutely miserable for the last 3-4 weeks. Santana, I mean, he's warmed up, but he's still hitting 181 or something. Yeah. And, it's the power, the production right now is coming from center field and catcher and shortstop and second base.
Yeah.
It's coming from up the middle positions.
Jeffers and Kepler.
Well, yeah, Kepler
have been just unbelievable for now, I don't know, a month. I mean, Jeffers has been pretty good now since the opening week of the season when he got off to a slow start. Right. There's 5 hitters in baseball with an OPS above 1,000. It's Shohei Ohtani, Mookie Betts, Juan Soto, Marcell Ozuna, and Ryan Jeffers. And
one of these things is not like the other.
Yeah, who?
You remember that from Sesame Street?
Yeah. And Kepler has been everybody's good, not as long, not all season, because he got off to the 1-for-20 start, obviously.
Right.
But you look at his overall numbers right now and think to yourself, this guy was hitting 050 when he went on the IL.
Right. Yeah.
And then he came back 3 weeks ago, I would say. And now he's got 950 OPS. He's nearing 1,000 himself. He's had a ton of clutch hits, obviously. So those two, I believe, since Kepler came back, Jeffers and Kepler rank 1-2 in baseball in OPS. So you get that out of two guys over the course of multiple weeks, you're going to be rolling pretty well. Obviously, Correa's come back and hit pretty well. Willie Castro has been awesome. I wrote about him this morning. Right. Just sort of how he's come out of nowhere, basically 2 seasons in a row. Right. To begin the season in a very small role and then very quickly be in a very big role and carry the Twins at times. And they've had some other guys step up too. But yeah, I mean, the lineup has been to do this without Royce Lewis is, and like you said, not getting big production at all from the DH spot and first base. Although they've gotten a little more from the DH spot because they've now been cycling Jeffers in and Larnach in at times. But yeah, I mean, it's remarkable. They think of how bad these numbers were and how bad they look too. Right. Through 20 games, they were hitting 195 as a team through 20 games. They are now top 4 in the American League in OPS and runs scored per game. And their batting average, while still low, relative to the league, is above average.
This is what we thought the offense was going to be like, but not in the way we thought it was going to be.
Well, and we certainly thought if this was going to happen, it'd be Royce Lewis with the 900 OPS right in the middle of it. So,
and it's not just Royce Lewis being missing either. You've had Buxton out, you've had Correa out, you've had Kepler out. That's your 2, 3, 4, 5 hitters in the original lineup. Like that's, that they've been dealing with injuries, and fortunately, and despite the fact that some of the veteran depth that we thought would be providing a floor on that has struggled as well. What has provided the floor has been the prospects who come up and hit like crazy. Jose Miranda has been. When Buxton comes back, this seems an odd thing to say. When our center fielder comes back, the guys at first base and DH need to start worrying about stepping up their games.
That's what I said. That it's really Santana. I mean, it depends. I really think it'll be the Royce Lewis thing because when Buxton comes back, my guess is they'll send Martin down, and he's been fine, but he's mostly an outfielder.
But in terms of playing time, they're going to put Castro back at third base.
Yeah, although, yes, but you can use Miranda at DH and first base plenty. I mean, realistically.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. Is it?
Well, but I'm saying I don't know that they're in danger of a spot. They're definitely in danger of losing playing time. Right. Santana and Kirilloff maybe. Right. But they deserve that anyway. I mean, they haven't produced yet. Right. So
I agree.
Those are spots where Santana maybe a little less so because they love his defense at first base. But, I mean, defense at first base is not the same as defense at center field or shortstop or something like that. But those are spots where you can't live with – we can live with it. But you don't kind of give the benefit of the doubt if the guy's not hitting. I mean, the whole point of those spots, I mean, obviously DH, the literal point of it is to hit. But first base too, and for that matter, left field, where Kirilloff's been playing quite a bit too. So, I'm not saying they're going to ditch those guys, but I think when Buxton comes back, I mean, it sounds like, I can give you some injury updates here, but Buxton, I think, will be eligible for the New York series back home.
Yeah.
I don't know that he'll be back that quickly because I'm going to guess they want him to go on a little bit of a rehab stint. We'll see. Sometimes he has, sometimes he hasn't in the past. But he's, I would say, fairly close to coming back, barring a setback. When he comes back, you can just send Martin down, which was the move anyway. Yeah, right. But then the clock kind of starts ticking on in a larger sense for Lewis's return.
Right.
The update on him, we joke about this, but it's sort of true. You can't ask Royce Lewis because Royce Lewis will tell you he hopes he can play tomorrow.
Sure.
No matter what. And he also will act frustrated that he can't play tomorrow.
Right.
But the Twins, Dan reported this last night, Dan Hayes of The Athletic, that they took an MRI recently, or Wednesday, I want to say, of his quadriceps to just kind of see where it's at. And it's not, there's still some inflammation in there. It's not fully healed.
Okay.
Now, we've seen pregame Royce Lewis taking ground balls at third, doing some running. Certainly he's been swinging for a while now. So I think they described it as 85% effort stuff.
Okay.
And if you watch that, you go, all right, this looks like a guy who's reasonably healthy. I mean, you watch him walk around the clubhouse, he's fine, all that. But the point with these soft tissue injuries or muscle strains is 85% is dangerous. 85% might be more dangerous than 50%.
Right.
And look, I'm no doctor. I'm an idiot. But what I mean is, at 50%, you can't play. At 85%, you might think you can play and might get cleared to play. Not in this case, but a player could be cleared to play at 85%, and then all of a sudden you try to go first to third, and you're out for 3 months.
Right.
And
this injury happened to him when he was rounding second base.
Right.
This wasn't a traumatic thing that happened.
Right.
And the fact that if you try to stretch, there's no way Royce Lewis is playing in a game at 85%.
Right. So
we've seen that.
There's overall, and it's not being viewed as a setback. This is kind of what they thought. This is why they said he's going to take a month off before doing anything. Then we're going to reassess. I mean, he hurt himself on March 28th. So we're roughly 5 weeks.
Months into it? Yeah.
Not even 6 full weeks from that. And so if you go back and listen to the speculation at the time from us or what the Twins were saying, 2 months overall was kind of viewed as a baseline here. Well, we're still 2.5 weeks from that. I don't think it's unreasonable that timeline will hold up. Now, it might be a little longer than that. It might be a little shorter than that. But what I mean is, from the moment they diagnosed him with a severe quadriceps strain, I think the date that people kind of circled and we talked about was June 1st. And it'd be great if he was back before that. But the goal isn't to win, a game on May 30th because he's back. The goal is to have him for the last 3+ months of the season, or 4+ months of the season. So I think Buxton seems to be relatively close. Royce Lewis is on track, but not imminent. I'm almost certain they would have to send him on a rehab just to test him out, get him some at bats.
Of course.
I mean, he'll have been out for 2 months at that point. But, that would be a huge boost to the lineup, too. I mean, the lineup is just good right now. It's what we saw largely in the second half last year, where they ranked second to the Astros in runs scored and OPS and pretty much every major category that you'd want to see. And for the most part, they returned that group intact, other than then you lose Lewis to the injury right away. And so what did we see last year in the second half from them? It was some standout performances, including Kepler
yep.
and Jeffers, by the way,
Yeah.
were both great in the second half.
Right.
So that's continued. And Lewis obviously carried them. But we saw a lot of depth, a lot of, the Twins' number 7 hitter is doing things. And the other team's number 7 hitter is not doing things. Willie Castro, guys like that. And so it's interesting to see that play out again. But I think because of how horribly they started the season, there's always going to be like a level of surprise or skepticism.
Of course.
But, people mocked me at the beginning of the season when they started so slowly. But I said, I think this has a chance to be a top 5 rotation, a top 5 bullpen, and a top 5 lineup. And it sure as hell didn't look like that.
I thought the lineup was going to be the strength of this team.
Right.
Coming into this season.
We're reacting at a high point. You're never as good as you look when you win 15 out of 17, obviously. But I think when you blend that together with how horrible they looked for the first 20 games, what you get is a top 5 lineup. And I don't think there's any – I mean, look, Jeffers isn't going to have a 1,000 OPS at the end of the season. If he does, he's going to win MVP.
For sure.
Kepler might come back down to earth. I'm not saying all individually they're going to stay where they're at, but I really don't get the sense overall. Yes, out of the last 17 games, they're punching above their weight probably, but that's true of any team that goes on a run like this. But overall, I don't think their, season totals are crazy or, kind of inflated or got helium in them. I think this is just sort of a top 5 lineup. And you get a healthy Lewis back, and that can change the game even further. So, yeah, that's been huge. And then I think the biggest thing beyond that has just been the consistency of the starting pitching. I mean, they just have so few starts now where the guy just, doesn't make it 5 innings.
Yep.
And it's interesting to contrast, though, against the bullpen being worn down. Right. Baldelli was asked about this yesterday, the day before, and I thought gave an interesting answer. The question was basically like, how can your bullpen be worn down if you're really happy with how your starters are doing? Isn't that sort of a disconnect? His point was, we're thrilled with how our starters are pitching. We're getting 5 or 6 plus innings every game. And if you look now, they're once again, I believe, in the top 5 in innings per start. So how is the bullpen worn down? Well, because we're winning every game,
right? And you're winning by close margins. Except
for
yesterday's blowout,
they
11-1.
Yesterday desperately.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you, and I was hoping Funderburk could just close that whole thing out by himself.
Yeah.
Him having a.
I think they wanted to get Stallman to the game.
I think
because it's his
did.
first game
that worked out
a year,
fine.
basically.
That worked out well.
He was pretty emotional afterward, I thought. He's an interesting guy. We talked to him pregame. He was very, I don't know, sort of big picture about his comeback and his other stuff, and just sort of.
When we talked to him in spring training about the surgery that he underwent, he was really optimistic about. I mean, every player in spring training is really optimistic, and they're especially optimistic if they're coming off of a surgery and how they feel, right? But his point was they ended up seeing in that surgery exactly what they expected to see in that surgery. They cleaned it all up in terms of the muscle mass and such that he thought was holding back his velocity. I don't know. Does he? I don't know that he's showing the same velocity he was showing
he's not.
before. Now it looks like he's become sort of a off-speed.
Well, he's shown a lot better
guy.
control. I mean, his control was never. I mean, he was throwing 99. Not a lot of guys who throw 99, other than Duran, have good control. But yeah, I mean, I think they wanted
a lot of sliders and sliders
well, that's
yesterday.
always been true of him. But they want to get him in the game. But yeah, the larger point of, if you win 15 out of 17. And you're not doing it by blowing people out. They've had a few games where they blew people out. But for the most part, they've been winning games, 5-3, 3-2, 2-1, whatever.
It's easier to have a rested bullpen if you're a losing team, right?
What's going to happen is, and this is a great thing. I mean, look, you want to use your high-leverage relievers because that means you're winning games, or at least you're in competitive games. But it does mean, Griffin Jacks has literally pitched in half the games. And Duran, who since returning, missed the first month, has pitched in half the games.
Yeah, I mean, when that Tuesday, that crummy game on Tuesday, I was taking a look at trying to figure out how they were going to piece together innings 6, 7, 8, and 9, and I'm looking at, Duran only pitched 12, 15 pitches the day before, but he's also pitched 3 of the last 4 days, and this is going to make 4 out of the last 5, including back-to-back
2 weeks back from missing 6 weeks.
Right. It's like.
And Jax had pitched 31 pitches the day before. He's been used
they
very heavily.
Really use Stewart back or Topa back.
I agree. So, but yeah, that's something to keep in mind with the bullpen. It's not a bad thing. It's not a complaint. People are thrilled that you're getting 6 innings from the starters. You're turning it over to the same 3 or 4 guys to finish out leads. And for the most part, other than that ugly game Tuesday, when you didn't have your primary guys available because they'd pitched 3 of the last 4 days, let's say. Well, the reason they pitched 3 of the last 4 days is because you were winning those games. So they're definitely 1 or 2 relievers short, but it's also, it's easy to just point to the fact that Stewart's out. Stewart, at the beginning of the season, it was Stewart and Jacks because they didn't have Duran. Then they get Duran back, and pretty soon after that, they lose Stewart.
Correct.
They envisioned having the 3-headed monster, and you're not going to find.
They envisioned a 4-headed or 5-headed monster.
Well, sure, but I just mean Stewart, Jacks, and Duran was what they were building this bullpen around, and that's a better trio than almost any trio you will ever find in the American League this season, or last season, or next season. But they just haven't had. They've had 2/3 of it, and they've done a pretty damn good job, other than an ugly. And the thing about Tuesday was, Duran wasn't available and Jacks wasn't available. Now, were there, certainly in retrospect, you could say they should have turned to this person, or you could have asked Bailey Ober to go a 6th inning. I will say that both Bailey Ober and Rocco Baldelli post-game were talking about how his mechanics were all out of whack and he was struggling early on. And both of them kind of described it as battling through the 5 innings.
Agreed.
Now, he was at 84 pitches. You could say, we need you to get 2 more outs or 3 more outs, and maybe that changes the calculus a little bit. You could also have turned to Cole Sands for a 2nd inning after he breezes through the 1st inning. But I will also say Cole Sands, this version of Cole Sands has been a 1-inning guy, and I don't think is quite
well, what's happened to Cole Sands is what happens to all the good long relievers who end up being really good. They turned into 1-inning guys. He was a multi-inning guy early on in the season,
right?
But he's been the 7th inning guy.
Yes,
on a pretty regular basis.
For the first 2.5 years with the Twins, including early on this year, he was your long reliever. And what would happen is he would throw 2 or 3 innings, and then he would take 3 days off. Right. That was more what he was used to when he was coming up as a starter. Well, now you're asking him, his stuff is better throwing 1 inning at a time. He's turned into a viable, at least medium leverage, if not high leverage, 1-inning reliever. But the problem there is he doesn't have much experience just from a physical standpoint of doing a 2nd inning at max velocity. He's got experience doing a second inning or a third inning or a fourth inning, treating it as a start where you're just sort of pacing yourself and you're as a starter. He doesn't have it where you're coming in throwing 97, you sit down for 10 minutes and you go back out. That's also why you haven't seen him much back-to-back, 3 out of 4, because he's still kind of learning to be that type of reliever. And so, yes, you could have pushed the envelope there, but keep in mind, it's early May. Like when you have a bullpen that's worn down, the last thing you want to do is wear it down more, because then you get into a point where you can't return from it. And let's be honest, I know people like to, when a bullpen implodes like that, and you can say, the number one criticism that people love to say is, why didn't they leave the starter in longer? Okay, fine. Why didn't they leave the first reliever in longer? Well, yeah, maybe. But here's the truth. They turned over a multi-inning lead to...
Multi-run lead.
Needing 9 outs. And the 3 guys they used, one of which was Okert, by the way, who's closed games for them this year.
Correct.
They gave up 8 runs while recording 9 outs. I mean, how is that not on the pitchers? Like, what are we talking about here? Like, yeah, you could have avoided that. Maybe you go to Thielbar, but I'm going to tell you this: Thielbar, I've seen plenty of people ripping Thielbar this year. Like, when you have 2 very good relievers, and your third is on the injured list, and those 2 are not available, you're going to get into some less than ideal situations. And if those guys just sort of faceplant, Stephen Okert, who's closed games, comes in and serves up a grand slam to the first batter he faces. And it was Jay Jackson's mess, but, whatever.
And Jackson had pitched just 2 days before and thrown 30-some pitches as well. Like,
right. I mean but you're going to need, over the course of 162 games, you just can't pitch your good relievers every day. You just can't. And if you try to push that in May, and I'm not trying to take away from how horrible of a loss that was on Tuesday. I mean, it was bad. I mean, afterward, people were like, that was bad.
Right.
But it's not
people being twins.
Yeah, Baldelli and
exactly,
the relievers themselves,
That's
and
right.
believe me, no, just guys I walk downtown, people I run into on the street, them too. But this idea that you can't once every 3 weeks ask your low and medium leverage guys to get 9 outs with a multi-run lead is just pure, 2020 hindsight insanity. Like, even if you ask Bailey Ober to go and begin a 6th, first of all, there's a chance he gives up a couple of runs. Mm-hmm. If you ask Cole Sands
he had been struggling.
Pitch another inning, perhaps he gives up a couple runs. But even if they don't, somebody's going to have to get 6 outs at some point. Right. And it's not Jackson, it's not Duran. Like, Okert was going to pitch.
Alcala was going to pitch.
Right. And so, I don't know. It's horrible. It's not to take away from that. But I think the overall kind of ebb and flow of a bullpen, and I know you guys always post at Twins Daily the bullpen usage chart before every game to kind of give people a sense of
By the way, we now have a page dedicated to it. If you just Google Twins Daily bullpen usage or whatever, it will take you directly to a page that we have where you can always see how many pitches each of the relief pitchers have thrown.
They're trying to get through 6 months with a healthy bullpen. And if that means having to turn to your lesser guys once in a while, and obviously you'd I had somebody say to me, like, I was like going back and forth with them, like really trying to say, like, are you being serious? And they said, well, if that's the case, if this is what happens when Duran and Jax are both unavailable, they should never use Duran and Jax together in the same game. One of them should always be available. And I thought, it never occurred. First of all, it's an insane thing to say. But the reason it's insane is, in theory, that's already kind of nutty. But in practice, what that means is Okert's going to have to pitch the 8th inning of a close game to try to set up for Duran because you can't use Jax. And so I would just – the only thing I would say is, look, you can be frustrated about that game.
You just don't have enough bullets. You just don't have enough cards in your hand sometimes.
And for the most part, Alcala, Okert have been solid. I'm not going to say Jay Jackson's been solid. He hasn't been. But Jay Jackson was asked to pitch the 7th inning with a multi-run lead against some right-handed hitters at the bottom of the lineup. Like, now, if you no longer have confidence in him doing that as a team, he probably shouldn't be in the bullpen. And maybe they'll reach that point soon-ish. Because I think
his start to the season, but yes.
Yeah, he's struggled, and his stuff has been down, and he's 36 years old, and he doesn't have the longest track record and all that. But Okert giving up a grand slam, Okert has been like their third highest leverage reliever, other than, if once you take Stewart out because he's hurt. So anyway, that's how I viewed Tuesday's game. And then they come right back, and the guys are available, and you see what the bullpen is capable of. The thing with Duran that's interesting, he's not throwing 103, 104.
Right, he's throwing 101.
He's throwing 101, and he's not. I don't want to rile you up, John. This was an issue for you last season.
Not throwing his curveball.
Not throwing his fastball.
But that's what I mean, right.
That's right. John's big issue, and many fans' big issue, was, hey, you have a 104-mile-an-hour fastball. Why are you throwing anything else? When year after year with Duran, his fastball is his worst pitch. His fastball is when he gets hit, what gets hit, generally. He's down to the lowest fastball usage of his life. He's basically at a even thirds with splitter, curveball, fastball at this point. I'm thinking it's a little bit higher fastball. But there's some at-bats where he's just toying with guys. The first batter he faced yesterday, or not yesterday, 2 games ago, was Josh Rojas, left-handed hitter, who's having a good season. I think like the first 7 pitches were curveballs or splitters. And then he threw the guy a fastball, and he fouled it off. He threw, I think, another curveball, and then he threw a 101 fastball, and the guy hit a bullet to left field that got caught.
Oh, right.
And that's sort of where it is. Like, if you throw a fastball at 101, and this is why I think despite he's started really well here. He's been excellent since coming off the IL. He's been basically unhittable. But longer term with him, there is a difference between 103, 104, and 100, 101. It may seem absurd that a guy throwing 100 is like, oh, no, he's throwing 100. Right. But I would want to kind of get to why that is happening, because that was the case during spring training, too. Yes. And beyond that, what you do see is, major league hitters can hit fastballs. I forget what the old quote, I think it was like a Hank Aaron quote or some old-timer quote, was like, I can hit a speeding bullet if I know it's coming.
Right.
And that is sort of true. Like, there is a point at which velocity allows you to get away with mistakes over the plate that you can't throwing 94.
Sure.
And Duran benefits from that. And that's why, it's important to see what his velocity is. But just in general, if he were a 70% fastball guy throwing 102, he would get hit a lot more than he is now because they can hit fastballs. I mean, look at the Twins lineup. They can hit fastballs.
Right.
Now, you can debate how much should he be throwing the curveball, how much should he be throwing. I think his curveball's not only his best pitch, but probably a top 5 pitch like in the league. But it would be less effective if he didn't throw 100
miles per hour.
Because it's all game theory. It's all kind of what's in the batter's mind, and then he drops that 98-mile-an-hour splitter. I mean, it's like an impossible combo. But anyway, he's been great. I think the hope with Stewart, he got an MRI a couple days ago, clean, no structural damage. I think he's going to play catch or has played catch. I would expect, barring a setback with him, they're going to be cautious with him like they were last year. But I would expect him to go out on a rehab stint here pretty quick. And if you can get him back into this bullpen, then you really have something. Because then you're in a situation where you can lock down the last 9 outs, or you can mix and match and always, it's more viable to say, well, how about we always have one of those 3 available on a given day? That's a lot easier to do when you have 3 than when you have 2. So
what are you hearing about Topa?
Yeah, unfortunately with Topa, who they were hoping, he was part of the Jorge Polanco trade, which is like a cursed trade at this point. Polanco is hitting 190 for the Mariners.
Right.
Topa hasn't pitched for the Twins yet and may not for a while. I'll tell you that in a second. DeSclafani's out, never pitched for the Twins. The 2 prospects might be this whole trade.
I was going to say, Gabby Gonzalez, he's on the
He's on the injury list.
Okay.
Not a major injury, but he's on the injuries. Okay. And then Darren Bowen's been pitching okay in the low minors. But Topa was coming back from knee problems, was pretty, he was already on a rehab stint, had thrown 3 or 4 times for the Saints, but the velocity wasn't, it was 92.
He was effective. He was getting good results early, but we weren't seeing the velocity they expected.
He's usually, last year, if you look, was pretty 94 to 96 pretty consistently with his sinker, which is like his fastball. He was like 92, 93 with the Saints. So they kind of slowed him down, and then he felt some knee problems after his most recent bullpen, I think, which would have been 4 or 5 days ago or something like that. Underwent, I think, another MRI, been shut down. We'll probably get word here while they're in Toronto what the next step with him. But yeah, there's definitely, when you get again, I'm no doctor, but when you get cleared to the point where you feel good enough to go on a rehab assignment and you pitch 3 or 4 times, and like you said, he wasn't bad or anything, it just wasn't popping like you'd want to see it popping. And then the original injury flares up again. Well, I can tell you that as someone who's got a bum hip and is going to the doctor today.
Right, that's right.
Like when it kind of goes away and then comes right back, that's usually not a great sign. So I think there's a level of worry with him.
I mean, what that means is you didn't wait, you didn't give it enough time, or didn't give it or it's just a problem that's got to be fixed in an entirely different way.
Unfortunately, what I am finding is there's no amount of time. You could give it 10 years and it's not going to be fixed. Now, I'm not saying Topa's in that spot. Like I said, I bet they'll have an update on the road trip because he had undergone, I believe, an MRI, which takes a little bit. Before we talk about the other injuries,
yes, let's go
updates. Let's talk about our first couple of sponsors.
Yes, let's talk about you getting help for yourself with BetterHelp. We talk a lot. We endorse this service in part because we know how difficult it can be to decide you need some therapy, you need to work through some things, and then after that momentous, just getting over that line, you start with the real struggles. Like, okay, so who am I talking to? How do I find a good person? How do I get on their schedule?
And when you're in the mindset of, hey, I'm actually today I woke up and I thought I want to talk to somebody, the last thing you need is anything that will kind of bump you off that path. And so with BetterHelp, they can set you up with a real licensed therapist. They can do it within a couple of days usually. And then beyond that, they can tailor it to what you're comfortable with. So if you want to do a video chat, do a video chat. If you say, I don't want to be on camera, do a phone call. If you're a weirdo like me and you hate talking on the phone, you can just do a live chat and you're typing to people. They will tailor it to whatever your personal preference is for that. And you can get it off your chest with BetterHelp. Just visit betterhelp.com/Gleeman today. You get 10% off your first month to give it a try. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Gleeman.
And then we got a new sponsor, something I have tried a couple times this week now.
This feels tailor-made to you.
It does. It is called Z-Biotic. And what it is it's a product that basically you take before, it's a probiotic, right? And the idea is that when you drink alcohol, part of the effects that you feel the next day are from stuff that the alcohol generates or byproducts of that alcohol. And this is a probiotic that helps take care of those so that you feel your best the next day. So I tried it yesterday because it was my birthday and I was going to the Twins game, and then we had a happy hour. And
John drinks once a year on his birthday. That's what he does.
Right. And at 5:45 this morning, I not only was feeling good, I was up and wrestling with QuickBooks at 5:45 this morning.
And he was doing a podcast at 8. I can tell you that.
Right. That's right.
So Z-Biotics,
so far so good. It's with the Z-Biotics.
Was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. When you drink, the alcohol, like you said, gets converted into toxic byproduct.
That's right.
And that can be to blame for the rough next day. So Z-Biotics has an enzyme to kind of break that down a little bit.
It's a tiny little bottle. You just throw it back before you go out.
It can be.
That's it.
Yeah.
And listen, we've had a lot of late night Wolves games going on, right? And you can watch them at home. You can also go to a bar and watch them with 30 people and feel part of that community. So try with Z-Biotic.
All you have to do. Go to zbiotics.com/Gleeman and you can get 15% off your first order when you use the code Gleeman at checkout. Z-Biotics is backed 100% money back guarantee. So if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money. No questions asked. So head to Z-Biotics. That's Z, like the letter Z. BIOTICS, zbiotics.com/Gleeman. Use the code Gleeman at checkout. You can get 15% off. Thank you for Z-Biotics for sponsoring the episode and John's birthday. Okay. So that's the injury situation. The only other injury update, and again, I'd expect some updates on the road trip, which I'm not on.
And they'll be back on Monday.
Right.
Or back on Tuesday, I guess.
Josh Winder also, who's been out all season, since spring basically, started a rehab stint with the Saints.
Yeah, I saw that.
He's not even eligible to come because he was transferred to the 60-day until late this month, so it's not like that's imminent. But I don't know. It's not a bullpen that really has openings necessarily. particularly once Stewart comes back, hopefully.
Yeah.
But, if they keep winning like this, or if they don't keep winning, but the starters stop going 5 or 6 innings pretty consistently, they don't really have. They've asked a lot of relievers, including Stallmont. Now he talked about this yesterday, but like Jay Jackson, Alcala, Stallmont, sometimes to their detriment. A lot of guys who have spent their careers being 1-inning relievers have been asked to throw 2 innings at a time or 1+ innings to try to make up for the fact that they don't really have a traditional long reliever. Because that was Sands, except Sands now has worked his way into a one inning stint.
Correct.
Winder could potentially be that guy at some point this season. Hedrick, same thing, but he's out with a forearm strain. So that's something to keep an eye on. The rotation, since this is going to sound overly harsh about Varland, but since not having Varland, which was the 21st, the last Varland start was the day before the streak started.
Right.
And he was 0-4 with a 9-something ERA in his 4 starts. So obviously they lost all 4 of his starts. He was replaced by Simeon Woods Richardson, who has a sub-2 ERA. I believe he's made 4 starts. That's going to go up. I'm not expecting him to be like a Cy Young winner or anything, but that's been a huge day. You replace a guy with a 9-something ERA with a guy with a 1-something ERA, you're doing something. And then beyond that, Bailey Ober, Joe Ryan, pretty consistently solid, other than the one ugly Bailey Ober start to open the year. Pablo Lopez had one start that was not good at all, where he kind of blew up in the 5th inning. Then had a follow-up start where he was okay, but I was a little worried because his velocity dipped again for the 2nd time. But his last 2 starts, from a velocity and stuff standpoint, have been excellent. 95, 96, which is where you want to see him. He was dominant. Last 2 times out, really. Got his ERA back under 4 after a couple of rough outings. And then the other thing with him is, you look at the underlying numbers, and this was the case last year. I remember having this identical conversation. Actually, for all you guys
right about the same time.
We've just pulled this clip from last year, and we've just changed a couple of things. Where it was like, hey, his ERA is 4 something. Like, why are you guys acting like he's so good? Because every underlying metric, strikeout rate, walk rate, home run rate, expected batting average, expected ERA, FIP, xFIP, everything like that, painted him as one of the high-end starters in the league. Now he's got a 3.89 ERA because he had a couple of clunkers in there. But across the board, his underlying numbers or metrics are even better than last year when they were painted him as a top 5 pitcher in the league. Yeah. And strikeout rate is up a little bit. He's walking fewer guys and allowing fewer homers. He's throwing more strikes. His velocity is exactly where it was last year, other than the one outing where it dipped a little bit. He's having more success with his fastball than he did last year, which is always decent to see. And he's just been very, very good. I don't think he hasn't put together a string of starts like he did in the second half last year, where you go, oh, this guy's like an ace. Right. But I think he's on that path. I mean,
Seattle's a team that's struggling, like you said, offensively right now. But he just looked like he was completely in control.
Right. That's game. A lot of this Pablo starts. He can be dominant. I mean, I think back to the start in Houston, he was dominant in the playoffs. I mean, that's one of the best performances I've ever seen. But a lot of it is, he's real smart. He throws strikes. He mixes pitches pretty well. And
I was a little surprised they pulled him after 6. Well, I guess he was at 99 pitches yesterday.
He wasn't going to start. I mean, he stayed in longer than people expected.
He went to 6.1. Yeah. Right, yeah.
Which Paddock did then the day before, too. Paddock kind of said, I want to keep going. And the interesting part with Paddock, that's his mentality. It's a lot of pitchers' mentality. But he's coming back from a second Tommy John, and certainly his workload is going to be a season-long topic.
Sure.
And so we saw it when he struggled. I want to say it was in Baltimore a couple weeks ago.
Baltimore got the snot kicked out of him.
But he stayed in longer than I expected.
Yeah, he ate it.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons why his ERA looked so brutal.
Yes. And also, a lot of pitchers, because of the bullpen circumstances that we just talked about, if you struggle, they're not always going to remove you after 2 1/3 innings. Sometimes they're going to say, well, this game has already kind of been lost. You've allowed 6 runs, 7 runs, whatever. You're just going to eat some innings here because someone has to throw the rest of this game. You can't have Willie Castro pitch, 6 innings or whatever. And so I'm not against that necessarily. They tried to do that with Ober in his first start in Kansas City. He just couldn't get it together.
Right.
But I am a little surprised that they do that with Paddock, because him eating the innings are still valuable to the bullpen, but his innings are a scarce commodity, or a more of
a limited commodity.
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's like, okay, we could have him eat innings, but if we really only want him to throw X number of innings this season, any inning eaten, this is getting to be a tongue twister, but any inning eaten is one he can't throw later in the season. And the same point extends to a couple days ago, where he gets through 5. And he threw a lot of pitches. They were falling a lot of balls off, but he looked good. I mean, he had double-digit strikeouts again. And they sent him back out to start the 6th with the hopes that he could get, I think, 2 outs. He only got 1 out. Garver got a kind of a cheap single against him. But the idea was, if you can get the 2 right-handed hitters here, then we can bring in a lefty, and it changes the calculus for the bullpen a little bit, even though you might say, well, what's the difference, 1 or 2 outs? But it allows you to be at a different part of the lineup when you go to the bullpen for the first time. I was pleasantly surprised by that, and I think Paddock actually seemed pleasantly surprised that he was left in to face 1 or 2 more batters, not because he didn't look good and not because they don't have faith in him as a pitcher overall or his mindset. It's, again, the same thing. Is he a guy you want to push in May? Yeah. If August and September you're going to be like, oh, he's already at his innings count.
Yeah, he talked about it in spring training, and I think he's talked about it on his podcast. I'm trying to remember whether it was when I talked to him or was in the podcast, but he wants to be a horse. That's what he wants to be. But the problem is he's coming off Tommy John surgery, and it's
the other problem is he's never been that.
Well, that's part right.
Before, after, during. And that, I don't mean that as like a huge knock on him. That's certainly his mentality. I mean, you watch him. He walked in for a start. We talked about this a little bit, but if people have watched Justified, which is probably, I think, a top 10 show all time.
I want. That's one of those series I want to watch.
Great show. I've watched it.
I've seen pieces of it
3 times.
Love it.
That's one of those I had to talk Becky into watching, because she's like, "Is this a cowboy show? Is this a cop show?" Which she doesn't like, and I'm like, "Yes, but you're gonna love it." And I promised her this, and it came true. I said, you will be in love with the main character
right.
within 15 minutes of seeing him. And it was true. I mean, that's her type. The bad boy.
Sure, yeah.
Obviously.
Right.
That's who she's with.
Yeah, the tall, lean.
Yeah, tall, lean. Got a Stetson on.
That's
just the gunslinger
what
type.
Do they say this? I've no doubt that you would rush in and save somebody from a fire.
Yeah.
But I also worry that you might have started the fire.
Oh, that was good. Boy, that was a Southern Belle, John Bonus. Ooh, that creeped me out, actually, watching that. I'm going to be honest. But the point here is, for anybody who's watched Justified, we joke that I am the opposite of that type. Chris Paddock actually does look like that. He strolled in 2 days ago prior to his start, and he had a giant hat on, giant cowboy hat on. He had the biggest belt.
Yeah, the Spurs.
No Spurs. But he had boots on.
Oh, yeah, of course he had cowboy boots. Yeah.
Skin-tight blue jeans.
Yep.
And he looked like Raylan Givens because he had like a like a kind of cowboy shirt with a very tight, slim blazer on over it.
Got it.
Giant belt buckle that I think is the map of Texas as the belt buckle.
Right,
and I really thought,
state of Texas.
goddamn, Raylan Givens is starting today. It was a good look. It's a very good look. And here's the other funny thing. So he leaves after, 5 1/3, I guess. Gets an ovation coming off the mound.
5 1/3, 6 1/3, maybe.
No.
I don't know. Okay.
He started the 6th.
Oh, okay. All right.
5 1/3, 10 strikeouts. Looked great. He only gave up the homer to Garver was the only damage he gave up. And he gave like a signal to the fans, and I think some family members coming off the field. And afterward, he's from Texas. I think he might be from Austin. But he's definitely from Texas, as you could tell by the description.
Sure.
Oh, he could have been from Harlan County, Kentucky, because that was Raylan Givens. Anyway,
right.
Doe said to him afterward, "Hey, I noticed you giving the Longhorn sign on your way off the field. Like, that must have been pretty cool, And he goes, "Oh God, no!
Not
I'm a Aggie. I'm a Texas A&M Aggie. I was just giving like a little message to my family." And he was like, "Oh no, I would never give a Texas Longhorns whatever." So that, just to clarify that, he's a Texan, but he's not a Longhorn. So he's looked great. I mean, he had the one start in Anaheim, like 3 starts ago, where he was like kind of mediocre. I thought the stuff wasn't where it's at, and that's what's going to happen once in a while when a guy's coming off Tommy John.
Of course.
it's not going to be consistent. It's going to be some ebbs and flows, ups and downs. But I mean, he was dominant against the White Sox. He was dominant 2 days ago.
Yeah.
For the most part, the stuff has been there, 94, 95 with the fastball. The slider or the cutter, whatever you want to call it, that he's added to the repertoire since spring training has been pretty effective and pretty consistent.
He's been striking people out. I think he had 10 strikeouts yesterday.
He always has a great changeup, although it seems like that's the pitch so far he's kind of struggling with a little bit or trying to locate better, which is interesting. But he certainly has looked. Now, it's a big picture thing with him, a long-term thing with him. The issue with Chris Paddack has never been, does he look like a good starting pitcher? I mean, Chris Paddack, from the moment he got to the Padres in, 2019, he's looked like a really good starting pitcher. Chris Paddack has shut down a lot of teams in a lot of impressive ways. And he's done that for the Twins, too, at times. Right. The issue with Chris Paddack is, can he do it 25 times a year? Right. Or, can he do it consistently? And I don't think we can answer that right now, but certainly there are encouraging signs on that front. Let's put it this way.
Nobody's talked about having an inning limit for him, right?
No, I don't think it's going to be a hard and fast. I mean, it wasn't that way with Ober even last year. It's not a hard and fast innings limit. It's more of like
it's going to run out of gas.
Right. I mean, look, if he's consistently every fifth day being great, they're not going to shut him down. But if he has some points where his velocity dips and his control goes a little bad or whatever, but I mean, he's throwing strikes. He's looked good.
I don't think we've seen a pitcher throw 100 pitches yet. Pablo had 99 yesterday when they pulled him, and I think that's about as far as we don't have.
Maybe. Well, Paddack threw 99 in the start because I looked up.
Okay,
he's only to my point of him never being a workhorse. He's only cracked 100 pitches once in his entire career.
Okay,
so post game he says, I think this is my highest pitch total ever, which was 99. And somebody in the room said I started tapping my foot because I was holding myself back from going, you threw 102 in 2021. Well, you were in there a couple days earlier. Baldelli says in the middle of a conversation.
So Tuesday we did the podcast. We did a Patreon. We only did one Patreon podcast this week, and it was Tuesday morning. And one of the topics on Tuesday morning was which of the Twins are hitting above or below the league average OPS. As a result of that, Aaron had looked up the league average OPS.
It was 695.
Right.
Because the point was that's really low.
Right.
And so it's important when you look at the raw numbers of the Twins to realize that, somebody has a 705 OPS. That doesn't look like much, but it's above average. Right. So we're in the pregame session. There's probably, a dozen people in the room or something like that with Baldelli. And it wasn't a question for me. He was just talking about something. And then he just says offhandedly, does anybody who what the league OPS is? And I go, 695. And Doe and a couple other people were like.
He did that. He looked right at you and he said that. Do we know
Well, yeah. I'm the biggest nerd in the room, other than maybe Doe.
That's it.
But then, a day later, when Paddack's like, I think this is my longest start. And a couple people said I was just holding myself back from going 102. Anyway, it's a little story. So Paddack has looked good. I mean, the rotation as a whole post Varland demotion has been excellent. I mean, maybe it's not quite at the level it was early on last season, which was just one of the best stretches we've ever seen from a Twins rotation, but it's just been consistently solid with some real dominant performances in there. Obviously, Simeon Woods-Richardson has looked far better than anybody could have expected.
My goodness.
Like we just said, I think the signs from Paddack are super encouraging. I think Lopez, Ryan, and Ober, for the most part, have looked like you would want them to look.
On the Patreon on Tuesday, we had a long discussion about Simeon Woods-Richardson. That's probably worth checking out if you do. Yeah. And basically, a lot of the discussion centered around just how good can this guy be? What do we expect? Can we expect him to be a mid-rotation starter? And why we might be underrating him or why he might have been underrated coming into this.
We'll see. Now, so he's going to face Toronto, which can be a very difficult environment for all pitchers. It's especially notable for him and for Austin Martin as well,
right?
Which is they were traded from the Blue Jays to the Twins in 2021.
Do we see Barrios this weekend?
No.
Okay.
He gave up 8 runs to the Phillies in his last
start. That's right. Yeah.
He was leading the league in ERA before that.
Really?
That'll be an interesting little subplot to the series. Can Simeon Woods-Richardson...
Then the Blue Jays beat up Aaron Nola the next day.
Oh, yeah. So, the rotation, the line... I mean, look... when you kind of pull back from individual players and you even get, slightly above the team when you're looking at it, the recipes can become so simplistic. You know what I mean?
Sure.
I know we get a meal kit sponsor or something. It's anything more than 4 stats. I'm out. sometimes with baseball, it can just be so simple. And it feels that way when you're rolling, obviously.
Sure.
It can be so frustrating in the opposite sense when you're struggling, because it's like, why is this so like obvious what we need to fix? But the recipe here is when you're hitting and the starters are going 5+ innings pretty consistently and you're handing leads over the bullpen, once in a while, the bullpen's pitched so much that you can't hand it to the big guys, and the littler guys struggle. That can be a problem. But for the most part, you win 15 out of 17 because the lineup's putting up numbers. They're supporting the starting pitchers early and often.
Right.
You know, it's a much different thing if you're a starting pitcher to walk out in the third inning and you got a 3-run lead as opposed to it's a tie game.
Correct.
You can feel like you still got to execute, but it's not one bad pitch is going to ruin this whole thing.
Maybe you can be a little more efficient with your pitches.
You can certainly attack the zone more, which a couple pitchers, including Lopez, has talked about. Like, they've been very good at that, I think, as a pitching staff. And so the recipe's real simple. If you're getting pretty good starts that go 5 or 6 innings or sometimes 6+, and the lineup's putting up 5, 6, 7 runs a day, unless the bullpen implodes, you're going to be winning those games. And so that's why Tuesday stands out, because the bullpen did implode. But it doesn't have to be that much more complicated. Now, you kind of zoom in a little bit as to why that's happening and how consistently can that happen. And we're talking about Sammy and the Bruins Richardson and that. There's some turning into a pumpkin possibilities
absolutely.
there. So then it gets a little more complicated. But, you know, you zoom out and it's like, I don't know, it doesn't have to be that much crazier than this. And this is, it's fun to win on like walk-offs and that sort of thing. And they've had a few moments like that this season, certainly.
Yeah.
But it is also fun to just be like, oh, they scored 5 runs in the first 4 innings. The starting pitcher was pretty good, and the bullpen hung on. It's like, okay, yeah.
Very workmanlike.
It's boring as hell. I don't know that if we were doing post-game podcasts after one, it was like, ho-hum, they scored early. The starter was pretty good, and the bullpen didn't screw it up. Yeah, we could pre-record those if we wanted to and just run it over and over. So
yeah, you're in trouble if you end up a little late. You don't get there in the first inning because you miss a lot of the scoring. But yes.
Although I would, like at the beginning of this streak, I felt like a lot of the offense was coming later in games against the bullpen.
They were.
Now that can be fun too.
They've had a lot of comeback games.
Yeah.
Almost did on Tuesday.
Let's see. I had a couple bullpen before we let's see. Duran, Stallmont's back. Oh, well, I mentioned Jay Jackson's velo is down a little bit. So at 36, that's a worry, obviously. You know, similar to like
he's also been used quite a bit.
Everybody's been everybody's been used a lot. But like similar to an older hitter, if their strikeout rate goes up, you start to go, ooh, like have they lost a little bit of hand-eye coordination or bat speed or something like that? With a pitcher, I mean, any 36-year-old who's struggling, you start to go, okay, is this aging? But, you know, if they're throwing 93 instead of 95, you go, well, that might not come back. So that's the worry with Jay Jackson. On Alcala, we've talked a lot about Alcala. I know, I've made maybe it was only on the Patreon, but so I'll repeat a little of it. But I just feel like with Alcala, so he gets called up. He spends 3 weeks in the minors. He was demoted last month, basically purely because he had a minor league option and they needed a fresh arm in the bullpen. And that's life when you're a non-star reliever with a minor league option. I mean, that's just how it works. Some guys can be sent down, others can't. And so when it's time to get a fresh arm, they go, who can be sent down? And that's who gets sent down. But it was odd at the time that they sent him down with a 0 ERA. He had pitched pretty well, and he had pitched in some fairly big spots for them early on in the season with Duran out of the picture at the time. Then he only pitched 3 times in 3 weeks at AAA. He missed a couple of days because his wife gave birth, so congrats on that. But I think they kind of let him cool his heels a little bit from a usage standpoint because he's coming back from multiple seasons of arm problems.
Yes.
Then they call him up. First outing, normal outing. And then Tuesday.
He ate it.
He ate the whole thing.
Yep.
And ended up throwing 48 pitches.
Yep.
And then predictably was sent back to the minors the next day before the next game. For Stallmont. And I have no problem with sending down a pitcher who's thrown 48 pitches and has an option and is kind of a middle reliever because when you throw 48 pitches, you're not going to be available for at least 2 and possibly 3 days. Right. And they needed arms. Now, it turns out they didn't actually need arms because they blew out, but they didn't know that. They needed a fresh arm. So they swap out Alcala for Stallmont. My issue with Alcala more is, why is he treated? And I honestly did not consider myself a huge Alcala fan prior to like the past 3 weeks. I know I'm being maybe perceived as that now, but my issue is more, why is he being treated like he's just sort of totally fungible, replacement level, random arm? And maybe that's just what they feel about him. Right. I mean, look, at some point you got to take the hint, right? Like if you keep asking someone to go to dinner with you on Saturday and they keep saying, "Oh, this Saturday I can't," and then you go, "How about next Saturday?" "Ooh, next Saturday I can't." At some point, you got to just take the hint and realize they don't think of you as someone they want to go to dinner with. Right. This is from experience I'm speaking. And so at some point, if, no matter how good Alcala actually performs, I'm not saying he was good Tuesday. He wasn't effective Tuesday.
No, he wasn't effective Tuesday.
But he also
wasn't particularly effective the time before that either. He ended up giving a couple.
But also, like, why is he being used as a 2-inning, 40-plus pitch guy, given A, his injury history, but B, he's never had success in that role. When he's had success, it's been as a high 90s with a good slider, 1-inning, 6th or 7th inning setup type of guy. And clearly they don't believe that's present currently, or they don't have faith in that. And so they're considering him more of a Jay Jackson or a Stallmont or Funderburk, where it's like you go multiple innings. Yeah. And so, okay, that's just a disagreement in assessing a player's value between me and the Twins, where it's like I see him as having more upside than that. I think he's shown that in his track record. When healthy, he should have more upside, but also I don't really blame them that much for, being skeptical of that given his injury history. Sure. Except I don't know that to me it seems
But if
odd.
you got that injury history, why are you doing
Exactly.
I mean,
if you're skeptical of Alcala being a dominant reliever or a kind of trustable setup guy because of his injury history and the inconsistent velocity and all that, I would think the last thing you want to do is have him out there throwing 48 pitches. And weirdly, for this year and previously, so often he's just the guy who eats it. Right. And that tells you they view him lesser, which, okay, that's just player evaluation. That there's disagreement there. But I just feel like it almost becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, if you treat this guy as lesser and you act like he's just going to mop up, at some point he's not going to pitch well in that role, or he's going to get hurt in that role, and then you can go, see? That's why we didn't trust him.
I mean, maybe.
It's strange to me, or the handling of him.
The way Cole Sands has developed is the way I thought we were going to see. Cole Sands is being used the way I thought we'd see Alcala being used, right?
I agree.
And Alcala is being used the way we thought Cole Sands was going to be used. Those two have swapped.
But it's strange because in Cole Sands' case, he worked his way into that bigger role. I don't know that the opposite has been true. Like, from a performance...
You don't know that Alcala has worked himself out of that role.
Right. Now, you look at the Tuesday outing and you go, well, he didn't pitch well. Yeah, I mean, okay, he gave up a couple of runs. But where he really started struggling was in the second inning. Right. And my point is, why is he throwing a second inning? Like, what? There should be... I don't think there's any circumstance with a pitcher like him with his injury track record where he should be throwing 48 pitches. And I know the answer to that was... Well, the bullpen was just on fumes.
Right, that's right.
But, yes, but just in general, he's been used in that way now for a couple of years. And so I'm at the point now where I don't understand it. I think it's a mistake. I've said that. I guess that makes me a big Alcala fan. I didn't think I really was. I mean, all I view him as is as kind of a decent seventh-inning reliever. An above-average reliever with a good fastball, good slider, struggles some to throw strikes and face lefties. There's pros, there's cons. I just think if you treat him as a one-inning reliever and you leave him in the majors, you don't demote him to AAA every time, and you don't have him throw 2 innings constantly or 48 pitches, I think he can give you 65 pretty good innings as a reliever.
He seems to have enough strikeout ability.
Right. His track record is pretty solid. Right. Now, it's had injuries. So, anyway, that's with Alcala. I don't want to make that big a deal out of it because he's just kind of an okay reliever, but it's...
But especially when you're talking about, boy, it would be nice if we had a couple more high leverage arms. Right. And in fact, that was kind of where he was
at the beginning of the season, and he did a fine job in that.
And I think that's what they wanted him to be. Yeah, Tuesday as well. Like they're like, well, we've still got. When I'm trying to piece together who's going to get through 6, 7, 8, 9 here, I would certainly put Alcala in one of those.
Yeah, although by the time he came in, they were losing.
Yeah, that's right.
Because Oker gave up the grand slam.
That's right. Yep. And that can happen. I mean, that might suggest that they were saving him for something,
maybe
a bigger role, right?
Yeah, although I would say, like, if you were saving him to finish the game that you were leading and things changed, what the F is he threw like 48 pitches for? But, before we get to some lineup and other notes and finish up here.
This last homestand, I went to Brixworth several different times during this homestand. It has become one of Chrissy's favorite places to go before and after games. I know I know Phil Miller. It's close to his heart as well because
local tastemakers, Chrissy Bonus and Phil Miller,
because he loves those hazies. Brixworth is a brewing company, right?
Beer and pizza are the two specialties.
That's right.
They also got burgers and stuff.
Yeah,
too,
they've got other stuff as well, but their beer and their pizza are both outstanding.
Detroit style pizza, which I love.
Yes, that was good.
A lot of beers that John loves and Phil loves and Chrissy loves.
And the great outdoor deck, the great patio deck.
Yeah, they're in the old Derby spot.
That's right.
Right by Target Field.
Right
Great
along
place
the train
to pre
tracks.
or post game.
Oh, my God. And the sun's beautiful Sunday afternoon sort of thing. And, in fact, now they're opening for brunch from 10 to 3 on Saturdays and all day Sundays. So, I mean, that's a great option before or after the game, right? They also have a new chicken sandwich that is tossed in their dry rub seasoning, and you can make it spicy with the chili lime fuego rub. And they have the very popular elote pizza. Is that how do you pronounce it? Elote pizza.
Corn.
Yes.
Good.
Making its summer comeback on May 10th. So that was today. Oh, cool.
I would eat that.
And features corn, jalapenos, queso fresco, tahini, elote sauce, and cilantro. It's just one block from Target Field where the North Star line is. Just Google Brixworth. That's BRICKSWORTH, Worth, right? And follow the signs to their great patio or join them at their great Burnsville location to watch the games on TV. Maybe.
And when you run into John, say hi to him.
Yeah, it's fun.
Or Phil. Don't say hi to Phil.
And then
Phil's
while you are at the Brixworth here in the North Loop and you get before the game, and I have done this, by the way, you can buy your you don't have to go to the box office, pay the Twins their prices.
As you're walking to Target Field. Or certainly as you're sitting on a stool
on the patio.
Yeah.
That's right.
You download the Game Time app, you open it up. Their specialty is hard to find tickets, and in this case, last minute tickets.
Right.
You can go and get a thing you can do with Game Time is kind of feel like you're getting the best value because they'll kind of compare and contrast the quality of the ticket, the seat, versus the price, and they can kind of tell you, all right, well, this is the best bang for your buck.
Like, here's what your view is going to be like, etc. And what I'm finding is that with as many attendance was not one of the things we should probably talk about. The attendance at Seattle series was pretty poor for the Twins. That means that there's lots of tickets available for probably even cheaper than you're going to get them at the box office. So we highly recommend you download the Game Time app. And
you can take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Just download the app, like John said, create an account, and then use the code Gleeman, and you will get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account on the Game Time app. It's an app, not a website. Redeem the code GLEEMAN. You get $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Attendance, not great, although it was 20,000+ yesterday.
It was 20,000 yesterday, but that was, that happens in May on day games because kids,
right?
You get a lot of school.
They had
school
70-something thousand for the 3 Red Sox games.
Yeah, the Red Sox games were well attended, but the Red Sox games are always well attended.
Well, yeah, okay.
But
right. Now you're at the point where you're saying the good teams that draw and the weekend days that draw. Well, the attendance is going to suck on those non-days.
12,000 people on what, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, right?
Right. They're ahead of last year's pace by
Are they really?
over 1,000 a game.
Huh.
So that's all I'm saying. Look, I'm not going to be one to tell you the Twins' attendance is amazing.
Right.
That would shock many people in the Twins staffers. I feel like, like at the state fair, there's the game. I think it's like a shooting gallery. It's like a little duck, and it kind of walks through here. It kind of bounces through, and you can ping it and send it walking the other way.
Sure.
That's how I feel at Target Field sometimes when we are critical of the Twins. It's like whoever I run into.
Say the television situation.
Yes, the television situation, which is not settled. I think there had been
settled. No big news.
There had been. My understanding is there had been some optimism that. Well, we talked about this. In general, when there's these stoppages in coverage or a channel is pulled or channels are pulled, it tends to last weeks not years,
Right.
because it does really force the issue here, rightly or good or bad. It's hard for both sides to kind of withstand the crap storm they're taking.
Yeah, well, this is painful for the Twins fans, but it's also real painful for Bally Sports and for
and we're not
Comcast,
saying that in the sense that it's like, oh, boo-hoo, feel sorry for these corporate.
No, but like there's a real incentive for them to figure something out.
I mean, Comcast, which is just a mega corp, like I'm never going to say anything nice about them, obviously, but they're surely across multiple markets and definitely in the Twin Cities.
Losing subscribers.
I've talked to a bunch of people. I've talked to multiple family members who are like, oh, I canceled Comcast already. Right. Well, I mean, they're seeing that in their bottom line. Obviously, we've talked about it from the Twins business standpoint. It sucks for them.
And Bally Sports is at the point where they still have to pay the rights fees to the teams.
We'll see about that. But so, yeah, my understanding 4 or 5 days ago, I guess at the beginning of the homestand or near the beginning of the homestand, was that there was a little optimism that this thing was making progress. But then yesterday or the day before, Bally or Comcast, one of the two, released another statement. I mean, I consider them one of the same.
Basically saying, hope is dead.
Yeah. They basically said, the S is effed. That's what they said. This is not the Patreon, or I would have cursed. But, so, yeah, I don't really have any tremendous insight into that. I mean, I think it's terrible. I think it's short-sighted by all parties, and it's short-sighted. I mean, we ranted about this on the last free show. We ranted about it endlessly on the last Patreon. But the weird part is, to me, it's short-sighted in a way that hurts every possible person involved, including Twins fans, which I'm most concerned about. Right. I'm not that concerned about,
You're not worried about Comcast profit margins?
No, I really couldn't give a rat's at, whatever. But it suggests to me that either everyone involved knows this, the whole building is crashing down here. It's burning down. Sure. And they just don't care about anything but the shortest term. Or they're just taking the most idiotic way to try to prevent the building from crashing down. It could be both, I suppose. But like just the idea of you're already hemorrhaging subscribers if you're Comcast.
Right.
Why are you trying to give
put that in turbo mode?
Any reason to drop you? I mean, they're losing 10% year over year every year, basically. Sure. And obviously the Twins from the same standpoint. So I wish I had a better update on that front. I will say that the Twins officials that I've talked to or been talked to by remain pretty steadfast in the idea that they don't have as much control as fans would perceive or we would perceive, that they've been pushed in certain directions or they're basically just along for the ride, even when they disagree with the ride. I'm willing to believe that to some extent, but my bigger point is, and I've said this to people, is you gotta take responsibility for the decisions you make and the consequences that come from them.
Sure.
And you cannot be the ones in charge and the ones making millions or losing millions and just kind of throw your hands when things go bad, throw your hands up and go, man, this sucks for all of us. You ain't in the same boat as me, brother.
That's right.
You're on the yacht and we're trying to stay afloat in a thing that's got water coming in. That's how
you got your check.
Right.
That was the decision you made. Did you want a big check? And you got it. There
are maybe some circumstances where a team can kind of say, hey, we're with the fans here. We're one and the same with the fans here. And that's how a lot of fans feel about teams. And that's great. Yeah. This is not this is not one of those situations. There's a very clear dividing line here between what the fans are getting and not getting out of this situation and what the Twins are getting and not getting out of the situation. So we'll see.
I'm sure they would be happier if this was resolved and they could be.
No. Yeah.
But
yes.
They did take care of themselves.
Yeah, I would say. Let's see. Had a couple other. Man, we talked about the lineup, but a few other. No, I mean they've been hitting so well. It's worth diving back in. Like I said, they're top 5 in the AL for runs per game, OPS, which are the two, quick and dirty ways that you would just look. Sure. I know everyone would love a very high batting average, but if you're scoring runs, that's the goal. It's like basketball. You'd love a real high field goal percentage and a low turnovers and all this other stuff to make your free throws and all that. Well, really, the end result is how many points did you score and how many possessions did you need to score them? That's it. And so in baseball, if you're hitting 300, but you're scoring fewer runs than a team that's hitting 200, the 200 team has a better offense than you because runs are the name of the game. That's what you're going for.
Speaking of high batting average,
yeah,
old friend Luis Ariz moved with it since we last talked. Or maybe he moved Friday night.
Yeah.
But we didn't mention it Saturday. Last time we did the free podcast.
From the Marlins. He was traded, obviously, from the Twins to the Marlins last offseason for Pablo Lopez. A couple other players involved in that deal, too. Prospects. And the Marlins are terrible. Although did they make the playoffs last year? They
missed the playoffs.
But they had a winning record last year.
They were close,
and he won the batting title,
right?
Second straight batting title. Although again, faded quite a bit in the second half, which has kind of become a thing for him. But was still solid. Just wasn't amazing in the second half. They are basically the White Sox of the National League. I think they have a very similar record. Yeah. They have single-digit wins, I believe, right now.
In more ways than one. They are also dismantling their team early on.
Right. They had new front office because having a winning record, they let go of their GM Tim Ing. They brought in Peter Bendix, who's a Tampa Bay Rays guy, so they're trying to remake the team in that model, which every team is kind of trying to make their team in that model because it's cheap and theoretically it wins. And those are the two things, probably in that order, that most Major League owners are looking for. But Ariz wasn't off to a great start. He was off to an okay start, but he wasn't hitting 350. And they traded him, which is interesting because they traded him just for prospects, basically. Right. And that's subjective, and they got one guy, I forget Head was his name. He was a first-round pick like a year ago, so, But the perception I got reading up on it and talking to a couple people, just asking them, tell me about these prospects, it wasn't like an overwhelming offer, which is interesting.
We can't say no to it. No,
right.
It was
for two reasons, because you very rarely, no matter how bad a team is, and they're bad, and they're they're not going anywhere for a while.
That's right.
Trading a guy in, May 1st is very rare. Really, I would say only occurs when there's some dispute, like there's some personal dispute with a team, or there's some contractual dispute, or a player requests a trade, something like. None of that has happened with Luis Ariz, as far as I know. So they basically said, we stink. The value's not changing on Ariz, but the value doesn't seem like that great. And then the other thing is, Luis Ariz is making $10 million.
Yeah, that's
season.
The real concern.
He has one more year of arbitration where he'll make $12 to $15
He's
million.
making $10 million, and he lost his arbitration case.
Right.
He wanted $12 million, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
They ate 9.5 out of the $10 million.
Did they really?
All San Diego took on was a minimum salary.
Wow.
And so you traded a guy 10% into the season or 15% into the season. You ate 95% of his salary.
Wow. I did not think that was going to be the case.
To me, if you would just describe the trade that way, I'm not saying they're wrong to trade Ariz. Sure. He was going to get. I mean,
you better be getting a really good prospect.
Yeah, and it's strange to me that. And look, maybe they just like these prospects more than the public consensus is on them, which that's fine too. If you're a GM and you believe that to be the case, absolutely go for it. But it just seems like kind of a poo-poo platter of prospects where it's like, a couple of these guys could be role players. The one guy could be a regular, something like that. I just think about, from a Twins perspective, what could the Twins get? I don't want them to do this, just to be clear. That's other podcasts that are going to say this.
Okay.
Twins should trade Pablo Lopez. But what could the Twins get for Pablo Lopez, who they got for Luis Ariz?
Right, yeah.
They actually got him and two prospects for Luis Ariz. It sure is how a lot more than the package that the Marlins got for Luis Ariz. Right. And you could say, well, Pablo's had a breakout since then. Luis Ariz hit 350 last year.
He won a batting title.
That either tells you
right.
that the perception of Ariz's value was much lower than Twins fans believed, which I think is probably the case, or it tells you the Marlins kind of F this whole thing up. So that's interesting.
Which is not,
the other old
not
friends,
surprising for the Marlins.
Right. The other old friends we mentioned, Polanco and Garver, were back. They're both struggling, although Garver hits a home run. It was good to see them. I mean, Polanco especially, I'm of the belief he should be easily a Twins Hall of Famer. Just on longevity alone, but he was also an all-star caliber player for a lot of those years. I think he will be eventually.
Sure.
Garver, not so much. He was more up and down career, but when Garver was good,
I
was actually telling a story about we were at Nick Nelson's wedding This would have been in 2019. Would this have been?
Yeah.
2019.
It's 2019.
And we were in his parents-in-law, his in-laws'
backyard was where the wedding was.
Great night, a lot of fun.
And we had the game
and
on
we
the
had
TV.
I think we were using your phone.
We were using my phone.
Propped up against a beer glass.
That's right.
And a whole table of all the bloggers and all the podcasters and all the Twins fans there, and there was a lot of them. We're all just staring at this thing, and Garver hit a 2-run homer, I want to say, against Cleveland.
Okay.
I want to say to right field. And I mean, when Garver was healthy, he is just the epitome of a right-handed slugger. He just destroyed left-handed pitching consistently. Now, unfortunately with him, it seemed like every other year, basically, he would be great one year. Then the next year, he would struggle and have injuries. Then he would be great the next year, and then he would kind of repeat the pattern. Right. And even when he was at his best, he had a hard time kind of, from a catching standpoint, staying on the field for more than like half the season. And sure enough, so he goes to Texas. The Twins traded him to Texas.
Right.
He had an iffy first year. Then last year, he was great. Again, limited playing time, but really good numbers. Wins the World Series with Texas. But the interesting side note there was the last time he caught for the Rangers was September 3rd of last year. He didn't catch it all in the final month of the regular season. And then he played 14 playoff games, and he was really good. He didn't catch a single inning. Then he becomes a free agent, signs a 2-year deal with the Mariners to just be a DH.
Right.
And he's hitting 150.
Yeah.
So this is kind of the story of Garver, which is like there's a lot of high, when the highs are really high, including a World Series ring, which is great for him. But now he's on a 2-year deal with the Mariners, and he's 34 years old, and he's hitting 150. So I wonder about that. And Polo hasn't been that great either, although he's drawn a lot of walks. But I think he leads the league in strikeouts, which is odd for Polanco. That's never really been his game. So let's see. A couple other things to end on. The old friend. There's a lot in Toronto, too. Old friends.
Oh, yeah, I suppose.
And we got their old friends,
right,
too.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is interesting. Plus, it's also, once you play a team in the playoffs, especially the previous year, and you beat them,
right?
I feel like they're connected now for a while.
Right. That's right.
It is interesting that the two teams the Twins played have gotten off to very disappointing starts. Toronto's below 500.
Houston,
when I feel like people have thought Toronto has been kind of ascending, and they made the playoffs obviously last year. They got swept out by the Twins. And then Houston, which has just been a monster for a decade, I believe they're like 12-24. Like they're at the point we feared the Twins were headed to when they were 7-13, and we said 20 games is very early. But if they don't turn this around in a big way, you can go from 7-13 to 12-24.
It seems like they're not hitting. Like that's the part that is the pitching. They've had a lot of injuries on their pitching staff.
Well, you're wrong.
Is it?
They have the worst ERA in the league.
No, that's what I said. I said their pitching has been terrible.
No, you said it seems like they're not hitting.
No, but they also don't seem to be hitting as well.
I think they have the third highest OPS in the league and worst ERA. Yeah, I mean their starting pitching has just been decimated by injuries.
Right. Yeah. The whole rotation.
Varland has come back, or not Varland. Excuse me,
Verlander
has come back and so far shown his age. They signed Josh Hader to like $100 million deal to be the closer, and he's got a 7 ERA or something like that. I'm not saying their hitting has been at the level it's been.
League average. They're right at the league average and runs scored. Right.
I think they have like a 5.5 ERA, which I mean, I would say their dominant hitting has been at the forefront. I mean, they had Correa and Bregman and Altuve and Yordan Alvarez and now Tucker, and I mean they crushed people. But the pitching for the Astros has been the strength, especially the starting pitching, going back to the Garrett Cole and Verlander, and they just seem to always come up with Framber Valdez to develop these guys out of nowhere, and then have bullpen arms. Well, Ryan Presley being one of them, who's still there, and it's just falling apart. I think one thing with the Astros, and we talked about this a little bit.
I think they expected the pitching to all come back from injuries, something like mid-season, and for the hitting to be the strength. And it's been.
But the thing with the Astros is, it's no longer what you think of as the Astros, and I don't even mean on the field. I mean behind the scenes. A lot of their front office and analytics department was gone after the cheating scandal. Jeff Lunau, who ran the team, was dismissed. A.J. Hinch left as manager, and is now with Detroit. And they have, I think, pretty consistently since then I mean, the Twins benefited from this. They have Kevin Goldstein, who ran a big part of their international scouting department, is now doing the same for the Twins.
Yeah.
They've had a real talent drain, setting aside on the field, which I think you can make an argument for that. But I would say in the front office, in the analytics department, in the scouting department, that sort of thing. The guys who put together this uber talented group of players that have dominated for a decade and found all these scouting finds, cheaply and turned them into star players and, did pretty damn well for an analytically oriented team. Almost all those guys have been pushed out. And now the people running, as far as I understand, are running the Astros are Jeff Bagwell, Craig Biggio, and the owner, Crane.
All right.
And I think we've seen in some of the decisions over the last offseason too, and I'll go a step further. The guy they replaced to be like their placeholder GM after Luno got suspended for the cheating scandal was James Click, who came from Tampa Bay. This is a common theme of this show, who came up through the baseball prospectus ranks. I mean, he's a uber nerd.
Yeah.
And then he won a World Series and they fired him. I think they renew his contract.
Yeah, I saw that. Right. That's right.
And so they have gone in a rapid pace away from the things that made them so good and the people behind the scenes that made them so good. And so, look, all dynasties, and maybe they fell a little short of a dynasty, but I mean, this has been a dominant
pretty close to a
team
dynasty
for a decade.
I think the last time they weren't in the ALDS was like 2016.
Right. Exactly.
Okay, that's a dynasty.
We're seeing it with like the Golden State Warriors. At some point, all the great players become too old,
right?
And the Astros kind of reloaded once already with the Yordan Alvarez and the Tuckers of the world, but they don't have another group to reload with. And so it's not necessarily some big black mark against incredibly successful team that after 10 years it falls apart. Right. That's how it goes. But I think you can see the last couple of years, some of the decisions they've made, for instance, signing Jose Abreu to a big 3-year deal at age 34 as a no-defense first baseman.
Sure.
Some of the trades they've made, paying $100 million to a closer.
Right.
These are not decisions that the previous couple of regimes would have made.
You're right.
And that's not to say that ex-players like Biggio and Bagwell, who are the two best players in Astros history, or prior to this group at least, now it's probably Altuve, I guess, maybe, but can't be as successful as a front office. But the owner seems very involved to like a Jerry Jones type of level.
Yeah.
And he's just got a couple of the all-time greats as his right-hand men.
His buddies.
And so what I'm wondering is once this thing falls apart, which it appears to be right now, I don't know that
how fast it's coming back.
5 years from now, I think it's going to seem weird that the Astros were viewed as like the blueprint of success.
Sure, yeah.
I wonder. I mean, they're still a huge market. They got money and all that. I'm not saying they're going to be horrible, but anyway, that's where the Astros are at.
I mean, one of the other disappointing teams this year has been Toronto, who the Twins are about to go visit. I just took a look. Their run differential is the second worst in the American League, just above Houston's. Or no, above the White Sox, I mean. Right? And, they are one of the, like we just talked about how poor they are, or how poor Seattle's hitting has been. Toronto has actually scored fewer runs per game than
Toronto. It'll be interesting,
and their pitching hasn't been particularly good either. Which
I think
I did not expect them to be in last place and to finish last place
for sure. I mean, they're a couple games below 500, so they can still turn around. I mean, they're not in the Astros type of situation.
But it looks like they're overperforming compared to their run differential, truth be told, to just only be a couple of games above 500.
Maybe.
Below 500.
And the thing, so obviously the Twins, we talked a lot about the Blue Jays at the end of last season because the Twins were matched up against them. I was surprised sitting in on both playoff game, post-game press conferences with their manager, Schneider.
Right.
The vibes were awful.
Yeah, right.
And look,
I thought he was going to be.
Anytime you lose playoff games, the vibes are going to be awful.
Sure.
There's not a whole lot of losing like Ron Gardner or Mauldin or even Baldelli.
Right.
Losing playoff, and certainly when you get swept out after 2 games, it's not like I'm going to walk away from the second game where they've been eliminated and go, really, Schneider really held his head up high and impressed me. I'm confident in him. He was very unimpressive to me as just from like a leadership standpoint. And there was a lot of talk of them letting him go, and not that that's the reason they're struggling, but they've they're a weird team in that I think they have a lot of high end talent. We talked about last year at the end of the season, the depth was real iffy to me, and even their high end like lineup talent, the nepotism crew of Vlad Guerrero and Biggio's kid and Bichette and etc. Varsho,
right?
Marshfield legend Gary Varshaw's son, Dalton Varsho.
That's right.
Who's actually playing well.
Yeah.
Probably going to win Upper Midwest Player of the Year again if I have anything to do with that. They're all right-handed except for Varsho. Like they have a million right-handed hitters, and I thought that played into the Twins' hands last year because the Twins' best pitchers that they wanted to deploy were all right-handed. Yeah. And so I wonder if you become. I mean, we talked about this with the Twins. Baldelli really values being able to break up both ways. You know, not having a million lefties in a row, not being predictable from a game plan standpoint, or not making life easy on the opponent, where they can just bring in a left-handed reliever and face four lefties
try and
in a
get
row.
a little edge,
Right?
in each other's spots,
or try to force them into. I used to always say with Morneau and Mauer, you can bring in a lefty to face Mauer and Morneau in the late innings. That's what you need to do. But you had Michael Kadire usually batting between him.
That's right.
That was the toll you had to pay to get across that bridge. And I just feel like Toronto stylistically, you know, Bichette, Guerrero, George Springer, those type of guys, and I'm missing. There's other names too. They're good. They're really good hitters. Some of them are off the bad starts, like Bichette and Guerrero. Right. They're good hitters, but they're all kind of similar to me stylistically. And I feel like, you know, we saw it with Sonny Gray and Lopez. Like those are guys who love facing a million righties. Like Pablo Lopez can just throw,
of course,
fastballs and sweepers. Sonny Gray, you think Sonny Gray's scared of facing right-handed? And even the bullpen. And so I'm curious to see how that works. Some of their pitchers, like Alek Manoah, who was really good 2 years ago, has been a disaster since then. The Twins are facing him Sunday.
Nice.
I think there's a very good chance he doesn't make it out of like the third inning Sunday, just the way he's pitched.
Okay.
So that would be good. But yeah, I mean, it's a test. It's not as big of a test as it appeared to be probably when people looked at the schedule at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, I don't think it's
This go to Toronto was a lot scarier than it is now. But, you know, certainly winning 2 out of 3 would be a very good thing for the Twins. And then you come back with New York, and New York's playing well. And, I mean, any win against the Yankees at any point is something to be celebrated. So we will be back Monday. With a recap of the Toronto. Hopefully we'll have a better sense of some of these injury updates.
Yep.
You know, we'll have some updates on Brock Stewart and Topa and guys like that, or maybe some guys pretty close to returning.
That'll be only on the Patreon, though. So
yes, Patreon, patreon.com/Gleeman.
And I'm guessing Wednesday we'll also be back and probably doing a mailbag. Yes. If you'd like to get your questions, if you got, as you've been listening to this hour and a half long of podcast, you've probably had some, I'd like to ask them about this. Great way to do it is sign up for the Patreon. Then you can send the question to us. We usually spend the entire time just answering questions so they don't get pushed aside. And
and also just if you enjoy this show, you will enjoy the other episodes we do, which are exclusive to Patreon subscribers.
Otherwise, we will be back next Friday, I think, with another free podcast.
Yeah, so. Patreon.com/Gleeman. Go sign up. We are, I believe, at an all-time high for subscribers.
Yeah, 40,
even though everyone fled after the 7-13 start, but we're back up to an all-time high in subscribers. So
it's ad-free as well. Yes. Although we would like to thank our sponsors today, which is Game Time and Brixworth and Z-Biotics and BetterHelp. We appreciate them ponying up so you guys can get this free episode. And we'll talk to you next week.
Go Wolves.
Oh, yeah. We should mention that, too, quickly. The Patreon also had a half-hour discussion about the Wolves.
We talked a lot of Wolves.
There's going to be a discussion on Monday morning about the Wolves.
Yeah, good or bad. Goodbye.
Bye.
Gleeman